Welcome to the Education Economic Development Subcommittee. We're joined by our Senate counterparts. As always, Chair Zucker is at a hearing on another piece of his legislation and will join us shortly, but has agreed to let us get started so we can move forward with the agenda today. We have three agencies. We will start with the Maryland School for the Deaf. Samuel Quist is our analyst. Mr. Quist, you are on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will share my screen so you all can see the presentation.
It looks good.
All right, my name is Samuel Quist. I'll be presenting the DLS analysis for the Maryland School for the Deaf. The fiscal 22 allowance increases by $182,000 to a total allowance of $40.5 million. The budget consists primarily of general funds received through the school's mandated funding formula, as well as a noticeable portion of reimbursable funds received through MSDE's Aid to Education program. Before we turn to the fiscal 22 budget discussion, I would like to point out a couple of items in fiscal 21. The first is that MSDE received $430,000 in reimbursable funding from MSDE for its share of the Governor's Education Emergency Relief Funds, also known as the GEAR Fund. These were federal relief funds from the CARES Act. They were distributed and used for supporting staff and students for virtual learning. Additionally, the supplemental budget number 1 includes a proposed fiscal 21 deficiency appropriation of $400,000 in additional federal relief funds. These are from the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act that was passed in December. These will be distributed through MSDE, which will provide the funds through MSD through a reimbursable fund budget amendment. Turning to exhibit number 1, this shows the fiscal 22 overview of agency spending. As you can see, the budget consists primarily of personnel expenses. Regular personnel are about 79%, and contractual personnel are an additional 10%. The remainder of the budget consists of various operating expenses for the school, including contracts for various facilities and equipment maintenance and repair, and other contractual services, and the purchase of various supplies and materials. Exhibit number 2 shows the changes in the fiscal 22 allowance compared to the 21 working appropriation. The largest changes are personnel related. Regular personnel expenses decrease by a total of $488,000. This is due primarily to the budgeting of vacant positions at base salary. The school currently has several vacant positions that there is either difficulty filling or will take additional time to fill due to the effects of the pandemic. These vacancies include the superintendent position, which is vacant due to the retirement of the school's superintendent in September. There are also a couple of other nursing positions and other positions that are vacant as well. Contractual personnel expenses increase by $439,000. This includes the cost of an additional 5.9 contractual positions, which are teacher aide positions. Outside of the personnel expenses, the rest of the budget changes are relatively small. There are some minor increases in expenses for contractual services, equipment, and other supplies and materials. Turning to the key observations section, Exhibit 3 shows the data on the number of high school graduates per year. In fiscal 2020, there were 35 high school seniors who graduated. Of those, 33 received a Maryland high school diploma, and 2 students earned a certificate of program completion. Exhibit number 4 shows the educational outcomes for the graduates. There were 85% of the graduates who received a high school diploma continuing on to go to college, and 100% of the graduates who received a certificate of program completion going on to work or attend a training program. Both categories met the school's goal of achieving 80% in each category. Exhibit number 5 shows the kindergarten readiness assessment results for the school. In fiscal 2020, the results were lower in each category than MSDE's statewide goal of 47% readiness. However, the sample size of MSD students being assessed is relatively small compared to the students being assessed in local public school systems. So in comparison, the numbers can fluctuate significantly from year to year based on that small sample size. For the recommended actions, DLS is recommending to concur with the governor's allowance. We don't have any further recommendations. Lastly, I would point out the analysis contains 3 updates for the school. The first is for the new superintendent search. The second provides some detail on the school's remote learning activities and its plans to transition to a hybrid learning model as allowable by statewide health metrics. And the third update provides a summary of a report that the school submitted in December 2020 to the Senate Budget and Tax and Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs committees. This was in response to a request for follow-up information on the hearing that was held on October 8th of those 2 committees. But I will stop there and conclude my presentation, and I can take any questions you may have at this time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Quist, for a wonderful analysis. As always, are there questions for the analyst? And I see that we are joined by Chair Zucker. Mr. Chairman, we will now move, and I'll remind the members for this portion, for this agency, we will remain in gallery view. We now have Mr. Kevin Stracham, our interim superintendent, and your team. Welcome.
Hello all, nice to see you. My name is Kevin Strand. I'm the interim superintendent. We are indeed looking for a new superintendent, and we have moved toward hybrid. There was talk of moving there, we're there. So our first group of students came back mid-February. It's great to see students again. Our second big batch of kids comes in next Monday. And then by the end of the month of March, all families will have the option for some in-person instruction for the rest of the year as we manage this. That means kids back in our dormitories as well. Our people are getting vaccinations, which is great, and so we're moving. COVID has been interesting for us, and we're moving right along. We're grateful for the grants and the support from the governor and from all of you. As far as the budget, we too concur with the budget.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Are there questions for the agency? Don't hear any. So thank you so much. Thanks for the great work you do educating our children in our state, and good luck with your search.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you for the next agency.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We'll now turn our attention to the University of Maryland College Park campus. We'll start with the analysis first by Ms. Sarah Baker. Ms. Baker.
Okay, let me just pull it up here on my screen if I can find it. Sorry about this. It's not showing up here.
We see it. We see it. You just
okay, I can see it. Okay.
There you go.
Okay. So I'm going to start with Exhibit 1, which is the undergraduate fall enrollment, which increased 1.2%. And this is mainly due to a 13.16% increase in transfer students. Exhibit 2 shows the trend in first-time applications. And since 2017, the number of apps has declined 5.2%, which College Park speculates may be due to students opting out of applying for fear of not being accepted. College Park did accept over 13% more applicants in 2020 for a variety of reasons, including that they were uncertain of what impact COVID-19 would have on their enrollment. Exhibit 3 shows the second and third year retention rates, and both have exceeded 90%. Exhibit 4 shows the 6-year graduation rate, and the gap for the African-American students has narrowed with the 2015 cohort, and they also attained the highest graduation rate of 80%. Exhibit 5 shows the graduation rate of Pell and non-Pell students. First-time, full-time students are more likely to graduate than transfers, and part-time students, indicating there are opportunities for College Park to target programs to help these students succeed. Turning to affordability in Exhibit 6, this compares the public cost of attendance to the net price by income level. And overall, the average net price is almost 35% below the published cost of attendance. Exhibit 7 shows spending on institutional aid, and overall expenditures increased $13.4 million from 2015 to 2019. And this funded an additional 3,200 awards. Need-based aid accounted for $8.4 million of the increase in 2,200 of the awards. Overall, need-based aid accounts for 40% of spending in 2019. So moving on to the impact COVID-19 had on the fiscal 20 budget. This is shown in Exhibit 9. College Park lost $78.4 million in revenues and incurred $3.5 million of COVID-related expenses, resulting in a total budget shortfall of $81.9 million. Reductions to the operating expenses covered about 60% of the shortfall, and fund balance transfer and $5.5 million in CARES State Coronavirus Relief Fund covered the remaining shortfall. Now, College Park did receive a total of $21.5 million in CARES funding, and the $10.7 million for institutional use was carried forward to 2021. Now, with the majority of classes being taught online in fall 2020 and residence hall occupancy reduced to under 50%, College Park experienced even greater revenue loss in 21, which is shown in Exhibit 10. Between auxiliary tuition and fees and the BPW reduction, the overall revenue loss is estimated to be $294.2 million. When combined with $17.8 million in COVID-related costs, their overall shortfall is over $312 million. Again, reductions to the operating costs, operating budget will cover about 61% of the shortfall, and CARES Act funding and fund balance transfer will cover the rest of it. I do want to note that College Park will receive $22.1 million from the Consolidated Appropriations Act that could be used to partly offset some of these reductions. Turning to the Exhibit 11 and proposed budget, state funds decreased $11.2 million or 2%. However, when excluding the deficiencies, state funds actually increased $5.2 million or 1%. Other unrestricted funds increase over $109 million, of which $85.9 million is related to an increase in auxiliary. So this implies that College Park is anticipating a return to more normal operations. Exhibit 12 shows unrestricted revenues by source. The impact of COVID-19 can be seen with the auxiliary making up less of the revenues in 20 and 21, and other unrestricted funds comprise 20% of revenues in 21, reflecting the use of the fund balance. Turning to the first issue of remote learning, transitioning to remote learning. College Park had to transition over 4,200 courses to remote learning last March, which required purchasing and deploying of IT solutions, which are listed on the middle of the page, and providing assistance to faculty, which is listed at the bottom of the page and onto this next page. Through surveys, College Park learned that faculty and students held similar views in transition, and these are listed in the middle of the page. And to prepare for fall semester, College Park used its CARES Act funds to provide 630 faculty with teaching innovation grants to support course redesign of various types of courses, which are listed at the bottom of the page here. Now, two of the biggest challenges College Park faced were minimum support of standardization and resource capacity. College Park also shifted its student services to online, but that too provided challenges, and these are listed at the bottom of this page and then the top of the next. We asked the president to comment on the efforts to provide mental health services remotely, if there was an increase in demand and how it was accommodated, and also to comment on how the shift to online and remote learning has changed thinking on College Park's future business model. Next is recommendation, and we said to see the USM overview for system-wide recommendations, and that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you, Ms. Baker, for the great presentation and analysis. Are there questions for our analyst? All right. I don't see any. So let's turn to our agency, and we are joined by our new president, who is off and running, doing a great job. Dr. Pines, it's wonderful to see you. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me today. Special thanks to you, Chair Zucker and Chair Barnes, and the members of the subcommittees for this opportunity to testify on our budget. I'm here with Vice President of Administration and Finance, Carlo Colella, and our Provost, Ann Wiley. I want to take this opportunity to thank the entire General Assembly for your strong support of higher education, and in particular, our flagship institution. I also like to commend our budget analyst, Sarah Baker, for her good work putting together another excellent analysis. We really appreciate her years of effort with respect to College Park. While University of Maryland is in the midst of navigating a challenging year due to the pandemic and the resulting stress on our budget, we have continued our momentum as an academic powerhouse and an economic engine for the state of Maryland. The past year was one of both extraordinary challenges and opportunities, and the University of Maryland showed resilience and fortitude in its continuing its mission to educate a top workforce, innovate inside and outside the classroom, and produce groundbreaking research to improve our state and the world. We've been working to increase minority enrollment for Black and Latino students in particular. For example, we just joined this past year the Common App in the past summer and became test optional for the next 2 years. We are already seeing benefits of these decisions, and we are pleased that applications to the University of Maryland are at an all-time high. We are nearing an all-time high of near 50,000 applications, an overall increase of literally 84%, and as well as an increase in applications from Black and Latino students. Admissions and the university as a whole plays a critical role in recruiting, retaining, and graduating Black and Latino students. It's reducing barriers in the admissions process, but it's also creating a culture that is welcoming and inclusive, and graduating students who think innovatively and impact the change in their communities and the world. I'm very, very proud for the first time that the University of Maryland College Park and the University of Maryland Baltimore were linked together as one research enterprise with combined research expenditures of $1.1 billion. This earned us a ranking of number 14 overall and number 8 among public institutions in the United States. With this new ranking, the state of Maryland joins an elite group of states with only 6 other states who have both a public and a private institution in its state that has research expenditures above $1 billion. The Empowering the State partnership, made possible by the Maryland General Assembly, paved the way for this recognition. We can't thank you all enough for your support of this powerful partnership between the University of Maryland Baltimore and the University of Maryland College Park. I am also proud to tell you that the University of Maryland College Park is a top 20 public research institution, according to US News and World Report, and a number 10 ranked Kiplinger's Personal Finance Institution as one of the top 100 best value institutions or public institutions in the United States. I am also pleased to share that our graduation rates are among the highest in the University of System of Maryland at 87% for our 6-year graduation rate, and that ranks us number 11 among all public research institutions in the United States. Additionally, we conferred 11,623 degrees in academic year 2019 and 20. 3,293 of these degrees were to STEM bachelor graduates, the most in the state, and an increase of 40% over the past 5 years. Now, with respect to inclusivity, in the midst of building the state's high-tech workforce of the future, we are continuing our work to create a more inclusive campus environment and receive the following rankings from the following sources. The magazine, Diverse Issues in Higher Education, ranks us as a top minority degree producer in 2020. Additionally, a top 5 producer in the US for conferring bachelor degrees to African Americans, and a top ranked in the state of Maryland for conferring doctoral and master's degrees to all minority students. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the University System of Maryland was cut 7.5%, and College Park suffered $46.5 million of base budget cut on July 1st when I started as president. And in the governor's fiscal 22 budget, there's been an introduction of another 0.5% reduction of our base budget. These significant decreases to our base budget could have long-term consequences on our excellence. And we hope to work together with the General Assembly and the executive branch to address this problem and restore our loss-based budget in future years. We've experienced significant revenue losses, as you heard from Sarah Baker, across the board, including drastic losses in our auxiliary enterprises. The effects of COVID-19 on our fiscal 21 campus budget remain significant and are estimated to add up today to approximately $150 million of shortfall in fiscal 21. While we have received one-time funds from the federal COVID relief acts that have helped our students and the campus navigate these shortfalls, these one-time funds do not replace lost ongoing base budget that we actually need to hire the next generation of talent for our university in terms of faculty. Having said that, I believe the state's flagship university is well positioned to meet the grand challenges of our time, including racial injustice, climate change, and poverty, and to be a catalyst for the economic development of the entire state. During my tenure as president, the university will pursue new heights in excellence in all facets of our academic enterprise and our co-curricular enterprise as well, and the creation of inclusive, multicultural campus environment. One cannot exist without the other. I call it inclusive excellence. So in closing, I want to thank you for your continued support.
He didn't answer the question.
Of the University of, I'm not finished yet. In closing,
Make sure you keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. President.
In closing, I want to thank you for your continued support of the University of Maryland. I look forward to continuing to the strong relationship between the University of Maryland and the General Assembly. Now, I would like to address the questions from our budget analysis. First, the president should comment on the effort to provide mental health services remotely, and if there were an increase in demand, if so, how was it accommodated? Now, there's a more detailed responses to this question in my written testimony, but I'd like to share with you some of the measures that were taken to address students' mental health needs in this unique and challenging time, including a quick transition to telehealth services at the start of the pandemic. 4 part-time psychologists were hired at the counseling center to address the current and projected increase in utilization of individual therapy and to keep wait times for treatment at a minimum. We intentionally increased outreach programming across campus and with offices serving minority students to increase awareness of the impact of the pandemic on mental health and the availability of services, as well as established a pathway for easy referral into care. Additionally, we developed the exercise referral program in partnership with our recreation and wellness to help support students improve their mental health and well-being through increased physical activity and exercise. We face ongoing challenges, such as the provision of treatment to out-of-state students given the complexity of laws and regulations governing mental health treatment across state lines. Making students aware of available teletherapy services on campus remains a high priority. Reaching minority students who appear to be seeking out care in lower numbers than their white counterparts also remains a priority. That's our response to question 1. Question 2, the president should also comment on how the shift to online and remote learning has changed thinking on the future of the University of Maryland College Park's business model. The University of Maryland College Park does not see online and remote learning as replacing a traditional residential college experience. However, innovations because of the pandemic will allow us to enhance the experience of our traditional programs with increased use of technology. We expect online learning to play a larger role in the future than it did before the pandemic. One potential benefit of changes due to moving online during the pandemic is that we have learned that lectures are more accessible when recorded and captioned. Pre-recorded or flipped lectures can allow for more project-based learning, applied exercises, and active engagement in the classroom environment. The move to online and remote learning has allowed University of Maryland College Park to pilot the use of telework for many employees. Even for student-facing staff, remote meetings with students are sometimes better conducted using video conferencing. Ultimately, we believe that University of Maryland College Park will continue to thrive as a residential, in-person campus of highest quality with enhanced use of technology where appropriate. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Pines, and thanks for your great work.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Are there questions for Dr. Pines or his team? Mr. Chairman, I think somebody on your side has a question.
Yep, both sides. It looks like Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. President Pine, so good to see you. Thank you for, we met about a month ago to have this conversation, but I just wanted to follow up. This subcommittee has heard quite a bit from students at Maryland and at Towson about the Medco leases. There was progress made. About 70% of those leases had been resolved, but there still remains about 30%. Can you give us an update? We just, I know it's been a chaotic year, but we have students who are still paying or locked into leases that they're not utilizing. So an update would be wonderful.
I think I might turn to Carlo to see if he has an update on this particular issue.
Certainly, President Pines, and greetings, everyone. So the arrangement that was struck with Medco, it was very similar to Towson, where essentially Medco provided relief for the fall semester to the students who did not avail themselves of the housing. So they can apply that credit to the spring semester, to a future semester. We continue to work to provide referrals to students who are looking to get out of their leases, even just because they've made different choices. So that work continues. But I believe that, together with Medco, the university, and the families, we've arrived at a place that is a reasonable outcome.
Okay, thank you. But has there been progress since 70%? I think it was around January or Christmas. 70%. We still have this 30%. What progress has been made since that time?
I don't have that data at my fingertips, but I can certainly check that out and see if there have been more referrals that have been placed. I mean, those students who continue to want out of their leases, we work to try and find successors. So I will search that out and send that information to you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pines.
Thank you, Senator Elfreth. Appreciate it.
And that'd be great. And Carlo, we're moving the budget, I think, next week. So if we can get those numbers before next week, that would be helpful.
Will do.
All right. And Vice Chair Solomon on our side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. President Pines, it's good to see you again. Appreciated the time we spent together, and I wanted to just first off say thank you to your staff and your team for all the help on our carbon neutral bill. I really appreciated the collaboration on that, as well as the work I know you're really interested in around transfer that many of us are interested in pursuing as well. And I know you probably share the interest that hopefully someday we will not be talking about COVID, and that will probably take the bulk of your presidency. I did have a couple of questions. One, I've heard from a number of students, and I'm sure you probably share this frustration as well. I think there's just a lot of general frustration over some of the requirements and some of the things that have happened recently, obviously with the outbreak. And just wondering if you could first off kind of touch on, what kind of collaborative work do you think maybe the leadership of the university could be doing with the student government and campus leaders around, trying to, I don't know the best word for it, more, sort of uniformity and observance of rules to sort of loosen things up maybe a little bit, but keep people safe?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair Solomon, for the question. It's an excellent question, and it's very timely. This morning, Vice Chair Solomon, we met cabinet to cabinet with the Student Government Association of the University of Maryland College Park to talk about this very issue of better, clearer communication, first to our students and our entire community, but also partnerships on how to make sure that everyone is following for Maryland healthy behaviors. In the past couple of weeks when we had to sequester the campus, and just to give you a little background, we've been tracking COVID for this entire time period and making sure that every citizen of our campus was making sure that they were following more for Maryland healthy behaviors. And we saw a pattern of increases in positive cases that was different than what we saw in the fall. And we believe that it might have been the presence of one of the variants on our campus, and we've confirmed that just recently. So that's why we took such drastic measures to sequester the campus community for about a week. And as you noticed, the numbers really came down significantly because of that measure. Could we have done a better job of communicating with our student groups? Absolutely. And so we had a meeting this morning to discuss the possibilities on how we could do that going forward, as well as reach out to the City of College Park and Prince George's County. And we intend to implement some of those recommendations that came out of our discussion this morning.
That's great. And I know you all have a really difficult task. And I think if, keeping the university open as much as possible, I think has been a great undertaking. And I just had two very specific questions. I know we've talked a lot, since the fall around the workforce and health and safety pieces. I guess there were just two quick questions that I had. One, and you may not have the answer to this, so I'm happy to get it later on. There still seems to be some sort of back and forth over whether staff are actually supplied with KN95 masks, which we know are sort of the the standard. And so, if maybe somebody on your staff could follow up, are your, especially the most frontline workers on campus, provided with N95 or KN95 masks?
And I'll have to refer to Vice President Colella on this topic as well, but I think you'll hear his answer on this topic.
Thank you. And the N95 mask is a personal protective equipment that is required by certain jobs and not required by other jobs. When it is required, it absolutely is provided in all cases. It needs to be test fit. So frankly, it's not very comfortable for some jobs. So we have certainly provided that in all cases where it is a job requirement. And in all other cases, we provided masks of different types. So I don't know specifically about the KN95, but the N95 itself is one that certain jobs, or if you're performing certain duties in certain areas, that is required. And you have to go through special training, test fitting to make sure that it's being used appropriately.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So
And
I think
then the last question.
Yeah, so I think the answer, though, Vice Chair Solomon, is that we are providing the relevant mask to the workers who are in those conditions to keep them safe. So for those particular positions, they get the N95 mask, right? For those who are not in those conditions, they do not.
Okay. I'm happy to follow up if there's any misconceptions among folks on that. And then the last question that I had, it's something that I raised with Secretary Brinkley, and I think the committee has raised a couple of times earlier this year, and I think it's highlighted more, especially with the recent outbreak on the the quarantine dorms. I guess I share some frustration with folks that those staff have not been paid sort of the quarantine pay, and my frustration with Secretary Brinkley was that we're paying state employees quarantine and isolation, an extra bonus for quarantine and isolation pay. And it's maybe less of a question, but would urge you all maybe to work with the state. I guess I view it as a piece of fairness that, I know you all have separate systems, but has there been any thought maybe about revisiting, especially as we continue, to have this situation, and it doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon, of making sure that staff are paid, equivalent when they're dealing with, with these difficult situations like other state employees are?
I think we're happy to take that under advisement and to reconfer and consider it in discussion with our leadership team, and then hopefully get back in touch with you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And thank you. And if I can just take a point of personal privilege with Dr. Pines, certainly appreciate all the great work you're doing with our local communities as the local 21st District delegate and that collaborative effort. I certainly don't think there's any greater, champion of you all down here than I. I love the University of Maryland. I do want to say, though, having said that, I did take a point of personal pride when you were rattling off top 5 in so many great categories. I do hope that we can get to a point where someday we have a publication that comes in talking about top 5 employer as well. And something I don't think we can lose sight of, how we treat our public employees at our college and universities. And I know you're working toward that and doing a lot of great work, and I know Carlo is. We're going to keep collaborating on that and working on it, but let's keep sight of that as well. So thank you for your leadership and everything you're doing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all. Any other questions? Okay. With that, we do have, I guess that's a good segue to Todd Holden with AFSCME is with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Todd Holden, and I am the president of AFSCME Local 1072, which represents over 3,300 employees on campus in a variety of positions. I have heard Dr. Pine's words today, and while I don't doubt that his intentions are completely noble, especially when it comes to creating a world that is more equitable and more just, I will say, however, that the employee experience, especially through the pandemic, has really led to causes and conditions that have increased inequity, have increased precarity, and frankly, have left a lot of people fearful of their futures, and feeling less safe in their workplace than they should be. When it comes to things like distributing PPE and masks, AFSCME requested bargaining over health and safety issues in the summer, and College Park refused to bargain health and safety, and claiming that it's a management right. However, our initial demand in that was for enhanced PPE, including N95 masks. When we were finding that through the summer and the fall that those employees were not being provided with sufficient PPE, and in some cases only being given 2 or 3 masks that were supposed to last them for a week or 10 days, we went out and we got our own KN95 masks and distributed over 3,000 of them to employees on campus. Now, with the CDC guidance out that people are supposed to be double masking or wearing a higher level of protection, I would say that that was a pretty prescient move on our part, because we recognize that if employees are going to be showing up on a daily basis and being in contact with students who often are not following the guidelines, it serves to follow that they should be getting the maximum. After the sequester was announced, the university said very publicly that enhanced PPE would be available for any employee who asked for it. Yet we know that housekeepers, when asking their supervisors for PPE, were told that, number one, the supervisor was not aware of that directive, and number two, it wasn't available. And we are getting reports now that N95s are available, but those N95s in some cases are vented, and the employees are not being told that they should be double masked with a vented N95 mask. So it just continues and continues. I would say, to Chairman Barnes' point about improving relations, I absolutely agree with that. The fact of the matter is that if Dr. Pines and the university are intent on building this better future for all, that definitely involves taking employee voices into account. And it certainly is incumbent upon both parties to sit down and try to work out agreements, right? And that includes bargaining. That includes actually written agreements, so that when an employee shows up to work and they aren't provided with sufficient PPE, there's actually common rules of the road and there's recourse. That's what we're asking for, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Holden, our AFSCME representative? Okay, well, thank you, Todd. It's great to see you, Mr. Holden. Thanks for the work you do for the employees.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Chair Zucker.
Thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on University of Maryland College Park. We'll now turn our attention to the budget of the University of Maryland Baltimore campus. We'll start first with the analysis from Ms. Sarah Baker.
Okay. Pull it up here.
We can see it.
Oh, awesome. So I'm going to start with Exhibit 1, which is the change in fall enrollment, and it grew 4.5%, mainly due to a 5.6% increase in continuing grad students, which is attributed to the new MS program in medical, cannabis science, and therapeutics. The impacts can be seen in Exhibit 2, with the enrollment in the pharmacy programs growing 43% from 2015 to 2020. Exhibit 3 shows the number of medical related degrees that have been conferred since 2015. And you'll notice that the gradual decline between 15 and 17 is related to a decrease in the number of Masters of Nursing, which has since rebounded. And additionally, since 2017, there has the number of DNPs awarded has more than doubled. Moving on to affordability. And in general, students with the highest level of debt tend to be those who are pursuing a graduate professional degree. Exhibit 4 shows the cost of attendance by various programs at UMB, with dentistry having the highest cost of over $93,000. Overall, 80% of a student's aid package consists of federal loans. And as shown in Exhibit 5, shows the average loan debt for the May 2020 graduates, and with the dental graduates having the highest average debt over $256,000. Moving on to the impact of COVID-19 on the fiscal 2020 budget, as shown on Exhibit 6, UMB lost 35 million in other revenues, which included 15.8 million was related to medical and dental clinics. The increase you see of 2.9 million in tuition and fee revenues is related to increased enrollment in their cannibal science, nursing, and JD programs. And while you'll note the exhibit shows no related COVID expenses, UMB netted those costs, which total 3.4 million against operating expenses. Overall, you can the budget shortfall is 35.2 million. And as you can see, the 41.8 million reduction of operating expenses more than covers the shortfall, allowing UMB to transfer over 17 million to their fund balance. I do want to note that UMB did receive over $1 million in CARES Act funding for institutional use, and that was carried forward in 21. So in fiscal 21, as shown in Exhibit 7, UMB projects a shortfall of 45.5 million in revenues, which includes 19.8 million in BPW cuts. When you include the 7.9 million of COVID-related expenses, the projected shortfall is 57.5 million. Reductions to the operating budget will cover half of this, and CARES Act funds and the fund balance transfers will cover the rest of it. Turning to the proposed budget, as shown on Exhibit 8, the adjusted allowance is 4.1 million less than the 21 working due to 6.9 million in proposed deficiencies. If you exclude these deficiencies, the state funding increases 2.8 million. And also did want to note that UMB will receive $3 million in Consolidated Appropriations Act funds in 21. Exhibit 9 shows a trend in unrestricted funds by source. And prior to 2020, the average state funds, on average, state funds comprise about 35% of revenues. But in 2020, it increases to 37%, reflecting the loss of other revenues. For example, educational activities went from comprising 27% of revenues to 19% in 2020. So moving on to the transitioning of to remote learning. The quick shift to remote learning last spring went smoother for some schools than others. For instance, nursing and graduate schools already offered many courses online. The issue UMB encountered, they're listed in the first set of bullets, and the next set of bullets at the bottom of the page summarizes how issues were addressed at the school level. And lessons learned are listed on the top of this page, and that includes that online learning has limits for clinical instructions. And challenges are shown in the middle of the page and include a lack of equivalent for clinical practices. At the bottom of this page is a summary of the transition of student services to online environment. And Student Counseling Center saw a 125% increase in calls to its crisis center between 2019 and 2020. Other services offered virtually are listed on this page, and overall, the Counseling Center has seen 47% more students requesting services. We asked the president to comment on how the transition to remote learning and delivery of student services has shifted UMB's thinking of how they can better and more effectively deliver program and services and opportunities and the impact on the business model. And the recommendations is see the USM overview for system-wide recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Baker, for that very thoughtful and thorough analysis. Is there any questions for Ms. Baker? I don't see any on either side. So we will now turn to the school. Let's start with the president, Dr. Bruce Jarrell, and your team. You can feel free to welcome your team, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for welcoming me, Chair Barnes and Chair Zucker and members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to also introduce the interim provost, Dr. Roger Ward, who is here, and UMB's Chief Business Officer, Ms. Dawn Rhodes, who is also here. As always, I'd like to thank Sarah Baker for her hard work and thoughtful fiscal analysis. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the governor and the Maryland General Assembly, and particularly these two committees, for their continued support of UMB. And I certainly ask that your committee will support the analyst's recommendation. Let me just begin with echoing something that President Pines said. and that is that there's been tremendous success of the Empowering the State program, and the NSF Herd Survey is one part of that. And although he didn't tell you, I want you to know that that puts us now in the ranks of research powerhouses nationally, such as Michigan, UCSF, UCLA, and other really very powerful institutions. So it's a pleasure to be in this company. Since COVID, UMB has really leaned forward to meet this challenge. And some of you may know we stood up a PCR testing lab, which allowed our fellow USM universities and the state of Maryland to do this testing. We've done over 740,000 of these tests with a turnaround now of 12 to 24 hours. It's a very high output lab, and an example of how we took our excellent research facilities and pivoted them to serve the state and the system. We also stood up multiple vaccine trials. We have a vaccination location now on campus and have done many thousands of vaccinations for our own providers and those at UMMC. We've continued to serve as an anchor institution in the community of West Baltimore and have paid special attention to the children of that community to help them with their education and other fundamental needs that they need during these bad times. And lastly, we've just recently turned our deep expertise in genomics to work with the state to do a broad surveillance of COVID variants so that we have an awareness of how common this new threat is to our state. And we've done all of these extra things while still producing the entire healthcare workforce that we did the years before. So we are up and running and functional and very much alive and well. The analyst asked a question, how the transition to remote and online learning and delivery of student services has shifted our thinking about UMB's business model. And I'd like to answer that in the following manner. I began by saying that UMB has risen to this occasion. We have been very nimble and resilient in our moving to remote activities. But there have been a number of lessons that I have learned that are very important lessons that will affect how we do business in the future. Perhaps the biggest lesson is that a strong infrastructure has paid off in multiple ways to allow us to continue to operate. Our IT infrastructure has been very robust, but there are other parts of our infrastructure which I would not want to undersell. We have a robust infrastructure for faculty redesign of courses and to teach them to be better teachers. This was started before COVID, and clearly we need to invest more in developing our faculty and our offerings. We developed prior to COVID programs that developed the leadership skills of our staff, particularly our mid-level leaders, and they have come through during these difficult times. And so continuing to invest in our human capital is important. It's become clear that our facilities and core support for our researchers has allowed us to continue to function during these COVID periods of time. And I'm happy to tell you that our research programs have remained very strong during this period of time. And lastly, and a really important point here, is that we turned our research facilities in a manner to provide services to the state of Maryland and the other universities in the USM. The PCR testing is one example of that, where we were able to repurpose a major investment in our institution for this other purpose. So one thing that I've learned that will affect our business thinking in the future is that infrastructure is critical and cannot be cut short during periods of budget cuts, et cetera. A second thing I've learned is that creativity is critical to our thriving. And I want the committee to know that our deans and faculty have been very creative and aggressive in growing new programs, and this must continue to be supported and encouraged by the president and the senior leadership. Ms. Baker noted that our enrollment has increased by 4.5%, up to 7,100 students, exceeding our projection by 3.4%. That came from a lot of hard work. Yes, it was the cannabis program, but it was also expansion of the nursing program and significant online programs in the graduate school. And we have had new remote offerings And I think in the future, that has to be part of our business model. We're not just offering professional MD, DDS degrees, we're also offering professional other degrees such as masters. We've pivoted to remote recruitment and campus visits. That's been very successful. We've shifted part of our professional courses to remote learning. Pharmacy is a good example. We are now even learning, and this will be a significant change for us. How do we provide hands-on learning for our students when they're not able to be in the presence of people? Things like remote counseling. How do we do remote counseling? That will be another area where we will have to focus on. Other things that I've learned is the power of shared government, and within our organization, the shared governance group is very strong and very supportive. But the two last things that I would really like to focus here on are, throughout this pandemic, we have taken what we call a family-friendly stance around flexibility and scheduling and how our staff operates at home. This is obviously really important so that people feel like they're valued, even though they may not be working on the UMB campus. And the second part is that for any policy change that we have made to respond to COVID or how we operate, we have made a conscious effort to ask the question of, what is the effect of this policy change on our lower paid employees, on our women who are faculty or staff, on our minorities who are faculty and staff? So it's really been a change in mindset to be asking these questions about how are we disadvantaging different groups on our campus. So I want to say that strong academic leadership has paid off, and in the future will continue to be supported. The last thing that I want to emphasize that I think is an important lesson is that teamwork has been critical for our business model, and we have to be able to reward teamwork and team members. Our schools have worked together in ways that they have never worked before together. That's a great asset. We have worked with our clinical partners, the University of Maryland Medical Center, and with our university partners, the University System of Maryland, in ways that we have never done in the past. I think that portends great opportunities to shift how we operate in the future. And we've done that with other universities as well. And I think because of this teamwork and collaboration, we are getting through COVID in ways that we would not have done without collaboration. So I think collaboration, lastly, will be a critical part of our business model for the future. So this year, we have been able to maintain our programs in spite of the cuts that were given to us by the BPW. I do not know how long we can continue this balancing act. And I don't know whether UMB will have the ability to achieve this balance in the years to come. But we've done this without layoffs or draconian cuts to operations. We took a $20 million hit, and we were able to manage that for now. But into the future, I'm very skeptical that we will be able to manage that. And I suspect that that base budget cut will cause us to make other changes in the way we operate. With that, I will turn it back to you, Chairman Zucker.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the university? I don't see any. Chairman Barnes, any on your end? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here and everything that you're doing to help our students throughout the state.
Thank you.
Committee will now turn our attention. That concludes the University of Maryland Baltimore campus budget hearing. We'll now turn our attention to the Maryland Department of Labor. We're going to start first with our fantastic analyst, Emily Haskell. Ms. Haskell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Emily Haskell.
We see it.
Presenting the analysis for the Maryland Department of Labor. As you can see in the budget summary on page 1, the fiscal 2022 allowance stays roughly level with fiscal 2021 at a total of $482.7 million.
Hey, Mr. Price. Good. I'm in the middle of a budget hearing. Can I call you after it's over?
Yeah, we definitely, someone can call you when it's over, but let's make sure we mute ourselves, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
The decrease of $20 million provided for the COVID-19 layoff aversion program in fiscal 2021 is offset by increases in federal funds for workforce development and unemployment insurance, or UI. It is important to note that both the fiscal 2021 working appropriation and the fiscal 2022 allowance do not reflect significant amounts of funding for the UI program. The department expects to spend about $140 to $145 million in that program in each of fiscal 2021 and 2022. A supplemental budget adds a little over $80 million in federal funds for fiscal 2021, and the department will also need to add significant funds for fiscal 2022 as well. This chart also doesn't reflect $15 million in coronavirus relief funds for UI or funding provided by the Relief Act for workforce development and UI. The department provided over $30 million in COVID-19 relief funding to businesses under the layoff aversion program in 2 application rounds, as shown in Exhibit 3 on page 8. $20 million came from the Rainy Day Fund, while the remainder was federally funded. The funding provided grants of up to $50,000 to more than 1,200 businesses in order to mitigate potential layoffs through training, purchasing remote access equipment, on-site sanitation services, and other creative strategies. Briefly touching on personnel, regular positions decreased by 23 in the allowance due to abolishment of long-term vacant positions. Contractual positions increased by around 230, mostly for UI, which I'll talk about in a minute. The increase also includes 24 positions in the Office of Workforce Development. This is due to anticipated increases in federal formula funding for workforce programs of about $6 million, and will also support efforts to provide reemployment services to UI claimants. From March to December 2020, the department provided workforce services to more than 40,000 customers receiving UI benefits, which is about 4 times more than the same period in the prior year. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in unprecedented levels of UI claims, and the department experienced challenges dealing with the overwhelming volume of claims, as well as implementing several new federal UI programs. Exhibit 4 on pages 11 and 12 provides an overview of these federal programs, including the 3 programs created by the CARES Act to cover individuals who would normally be ineligible, extend the duration of benefits, and provide a weekly $600 supplement to all claimants. Other programs listed include the Lost Wages Assistance Program that provided a temporary $300 weekly supplement for some claimants following the expiration of the $600 supplement at the end of July, and the Mixed Earner Unemployment Compensation Program, which was created by the federal December relief legislation to provide a $100 weekly supplement for some claimants who earned income from self-employment in the prior tax year. The department is still working on implementing this new program. The December legislation also reinstated a weekly supplement for all claimants of $300 from the beginning of January through March 13th, and extended the availability of benefits under the other CARES Act programs through early April for applications submitted by March 13th. Exhibit 5 on page 13 shows the claims volume by program from June through the start of January. Overall, claims have been remaining fairly level, but still above the peak of the Great Recession. Claims in the pandemic extended unemployment compensation program, which is for those who have exhausted other benefits, have been increasing. Exhibit 6 on page 14 shows the benefits paid from March to December 2020, with $1.6 billion from the UI Trust Fund and $7.8 billion from federally funded benefits. Exhibit 7 on page 15 shows that the department historically met the federal timeliness standard of paying out the first week of benefits within 21 days, but has fallen far short during the pandemic, although timeliness has been generally improving since the low point in June. You're all aware of the challenges the department has faced with rolling out their new IT system, with fraud, and with connecting with customers. I want to focus a minute on staffing at the call center and for adjudicating claims issues. Fiscal 2022 allowance includes funding for just over 230 contractual positions for UI, which is an increase of nearly 200 positions. The department plans to convert successful contractual staff to available regular PINs within 6 months to a year of hiring. In addition to approximately 100 contractual staff and 325 regular staff currently working in the Office of UI, the department is contracted for an additional 1,950 staff through 2 contracts, which are shown in Exhibit 8 on page 17. These contracts total over $170 million for augmented staffing from April 2020 through November 2021. The department is adding new staff every week through these contracts and hopes to reach the full 1,950 staff by the end of March. DLS has asked the department to comment on their ongoing efforts to add staff and on benchmarks for success of these contracts in reducing call center wait times and clearing the backlog of cases pending adjudication. Finally, the DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance, and it's shown on page 19. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haskell, for that fantastic analysis. Questions for Ms. Haskell? Okay. I don't see any, so we will now turn to the Secretary of the Maryland State Department of Labor, Tiffany Robinson, and the Secretary's team. Welcome, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Chair Zucker and Chair Barnes. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. I want to just thank you for having us here today. For the record, Tiffany Robinson, Secretary at the Maryland Department of Labor. And I will start by saying thank you to our analyst, Emily Haskell. We know that Ms. Haskell has spent many long hours taking a deep dive into our budget, and we sincerely appreciate her collaboration in working with our team during this process. And speaking of my team, I would love to introduce all of them to you, but in the interest of time and with this virtual format, I will simply let you know that my entire senior leadership team is on this call with me today, should you have any questions for them. And that includes all of my division leaders, with the exception of Assistant Secretary Dana Freeman for the moment, who oversees the Division of Unemployment Insurance, as she was called to testify at the last minute to, at the same time, in an ECM committee hearing discussing multiple pieces of unemployment insurance legislation. So I'm sure you understand that predicament. But next, I'd like to very briefly highlight just a sampling of the department's accomplishments in fiscal year 20. Our Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning has continued to provide valuable support and virtual services to businesses and job seekers through the state's 30 American Job Centers. Targeted, we've had multiple targeted recruitment events, and most notably, as Ms. Haskell mentioned, our COVID-19 Layoff Aversion Fund saved 21,555 jobs and supported 1,267 small businesses in all 24 jurisdictions in the state. Our Office of Financial Regulation has continued protecting and advocating for Maryland consumers by recovering nearly $5 million in restitution, sharing financial assistance resources through the COVID-19 pandemic, and playing an integral role in the extension of the foreclosure moratorium. Our Division of Labor and Industry continues to enforce workers' rights and protect public safety without interruption through inspection, education, and extremely proactive outreach through the COVID-19 pandemic. Our Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing is maintaining and processing over 275 licenses to help support Marylanders going to work, from home improvement contractors, plumbers, professional engineers, and cosmetologists. The Racing Commission has worked tirelessly on behalf of this important industry and has passed 21 different safety initiatives to protect the welfare of horses and jockeys. And that brings me to the Division of Unemployment Insurance. I will talk more about staffing next, but it's important to note that this division has launched a fully modernized unemployment system for claimants, employers, and staff in the midst of a global pandemic and record unemployment volume, while paying over $10 billion in benefits and implementing 9 new federal programs. The challenges have undoubtedly been great, but we are proud to be serving hundreds of thousands of Marylanders every single day. As you heard from Ms. Haskell, DLS concurred with Governor Hogan's budget, but did ask the department to comment on our ongoing efforts to add staff to support the Division of Unemployment Insurance, and also asked us to speak about our partnership efforts with our vendors, Accenture and Alorica, in reducing call center wait times and clearing the backlog of pending adjudication cases. So I'll be happy to address those issues. Please know that additional detail was provided in our written response, along with a chart highlighting our historical and current staffing levels. We thought this was important for you to see the visual of the historical impact of this pandemic on the UI program. In 2019, the department received only 429 new claims. In comparison, over 1.4 million new claims were filed only from March to December of 2020. That's an increase of over 814% in that short time frame. There were times, as I'm sure you've heard me say before, in 2020 that the department received over 100,000 new claims in just 1 week. And for comparison, the highest number of new claims ever received in 1 week during the Great Recession was 6,000 claims. So we're not comparing apples to apples. It's been a historical volume that we're experiencing. It's not only been unexpected, but it's truly unprecedented. It's important to note that we're also serving hundreds of thousands of customers who, prior to the passage of the CARES Act, were never even eligible for unemployment benefits, including self-employed and independent contractors. While with the extended and enhanced benefits now offered under the Continued Assistance for Unemployed Workers Act, this volume has continued in 2021, with over 240,000 new claims being filed in just 2 months, for over 1.6 million new claims filed in total since the beginning of the pandemic. So I think it's obvious why we needed to drastically augment our staffing levels, which brings me to our contracts with our vendors, Alorica and Accenture, which you asked us to elaborate on. The department's contract with Alorica was an emergency procurement for staff augmentation services to assist with the adjudication backlog. The initial contract added 575 staff and included an extension modification and for up to another 100 staff. And the initial contract included a performance metric of onboarding a minimum of 25 employees per week. So as of early February, Alorica has onboarded 230 staff members, has made a total of 48,463 outbound telephone calls, and has resolved a total of 14,143 cases. So as this contract is our more recent contract, this vendor is training, recruiting staff as quickly as possible, and we anticipate this progress to just make more progress and expand more quickly as we move forward. While Alorica is our adjudication vendor, Accenture is our call center vendor. And as of March 2nd of this year, Accenture had a total of 810 agents working for the department, and we plan to exceed 1,000 agents on board as of next week. The original statement of work for this contract was only for 200 staff, but it has been modified 3 times since then, giving us a cumulative total of up to 1,275 staff. As you can imagine, when the CARES Act was passed, we had no way to know exactly how many additional new claims would be filed in our system because we were receiving claims from a population that had never been eligible before. So it was hard to predict, and we appreciate BPW being cooperative and allowing us to modify this emergency contract. But from April 2020 through February 18th, 2021, we have received nearly 22 million calls via the Accenture virtual call center. And because of this unprecedented volume, the department has implemented several ways to contact us through our Accenture vendor, including a live chat and a virtual chat. And we've also implemented the Salesforce CRM tool, which Accenture agents are utilizing as well. So we have an internal team supporting these vendors every single day, but we're also connecting vendor to vendor to ensure that our customers are served completely and as efficiently as possible under these difficult circumstances. The Accenture staffing has handled almost 4 million incoming conversations with claimants through calls, virtual conversations, and live chats. And both Accenture and Alorica are also making outbound calls on a daily basis. Almost 50,000 calls have made outbound by Alorica, and over 340,000 callbacks and outbound calls have been made at a minimum by Accenture. We have over 60,000 cases that have been resolved and closed through our Salesforce customer relationship tool. And of course, our UI staff can also communicate with the constituent right through their Beacon portal. That is a new feature that we implemented in the past month. We have always been able to send outgoing messages through the Beacon portal, but now our staff can communicate back and forth and receive, and it's just another way that our customers can communicate with us since the volume is so high. So in closing on my part, we will continue to work with these vendors to onboard staff for as long as our federal grants will support. We're monitoring federal legislation closely, which we hope will allow us to continue using vendor staff rather than merit staff, as this flexibility did have to be added by the federal legislation. With that, my team and I are available to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm sure that a number of my colleagues will have questions. So the General Assembly added on to the Relief Act checks that would go to those folks that were sort of in unemployment insurance kind of waiting or purgatory, we call it. So the question I have is, how many folks have gotten their $1,000 checks, and how many folks ultimately qualified for it? Because we had been hearing various numbers.
Sure, I'm happy to report that Our pending numbers this week are down below 4%. We are at 3.8% of all claims that are pending, awaiting adjudication. But it was a little over 27,000 of those claimants who were eligible. They had been waiting longer than 30 days and had not been flagged for fraud. That was the number and the information that was sent to the comptroller's office as of Tuesday night. It was due by legislation on Wednesday, March 3rd. So it would be a question for the comptroller as to how many checks have gone out at this point. I know they were hoping to do that as quickly as possible, but there are frequently asked questions available on the comptroller's website specific to the eligibility of those checks and that provision of the Relief Act.
I'll get an answer for us by probably 2 questions, and start with Senator Elfreth, and then I'll turn it to Chair Barnes, and you can recognize his folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, thank you. Good to see you. Just for the folks to know, I met with the Secretary probably about a month back to talk about some of the issues we're seeing in our district. So far, my staff has helped about 700 constituents who have had some very tough issues, but many still remain in this purgatory. And Jennifer in my office is actually on the phone right now with someone who calls the office about 5 times a day, who suffers from some technical challenges in terms of getting understanding the website. I think the stress of this entire situation has led to some mental health challenges for folks as well. So folks are dealing with very incredibly difficult situations, folks who don't know how to keep a roof over their head or turn the heat on or put food on the table for their kids. It's incredibly stressful. We're still working on a lot of them. Your staff has been wonderful. Jennifer asked that I particularly thank Victor, Michael, and Wayne Cooper for being helpful, but we still have a lot of cases, and you know this, but Jennifer on my staff, who's a full-time during session, she's full-time on unemployment insurance. She might as well work for the Department of Labor at this point. She's doing wonderful. Your staff that liaises with us is doing a good job, but we still have a lot of people stuck in this pipeline. So I just have a couple of questions about that, Mr. Chair. A lot of this has to do with not having the staff to proactively be on the phones and kind of work with people through these highly difficult cases. We're excited to see this transition from Bank of America. That's been a hiccup for a lot of our constituents. The card itself, and frankly, working with a third-party vendor always has its challenges. But Madam Secretary, how will the transition to Bank of America benefit cards to direct deposit be managed? We've already heard from a number of constituents who don't have bank accounts. So we're going to have a kind of new challenge when that happens.
Thank you, Senator, for those comments and questions. We are working very closely through this transition with both parties, with Bank of America and with Wells Fargo. We are thrilled to be working with Wells Fargo, who already had a contract with the State Treasurer's Office. So we were able to modify that contract and work with a vendor that our state is already, has a relationship with. Mm-hmm. And Bank of America has agreed to service our customers and work with us during the transition. So as we work through that on the back end, we will be communicating regularly with customers via direct email, in their Beacon portal, on our website, through social media. In the coming weeks, our customers will start seeing information and instructions leading up to what they can do and giving them plenty of time to do that. Anyone who already has a bank account will be able to simply input that bank account information into their Beacon portal. That will not be something that our staff will do. That will be something the customer does directly in their Beacon portal, because that ability was already programmed by our Sagitech vendor for the Beacon system. So we're happy to be able to provide that. We're also working to ensure that we have account verification services to eliminate as much fraud as possible. You're right, there are problems consistently with mailing addresses being changed, cards being stolen. This will eliminate that aspect of the debit card system. That being said, we certainly know that not everyone has a bank account. We are going to provide all the information we can to make it as easy as possible for those customers. I'm in Baltimore City in my office. I apologize if you can hear the sirens in the background. We're going to make sure all of our customers have all the information available to them so that they may easily open a bank account. with a partner in our state if they feel comfortable and would like to do that. If not, we certainly will be providing a paper check option, not internally, but that is part of our contract with Wells Fargo. So that will also happen with Wells Fargo, and right in their Beacon portal, they can elect to upload their information and have their account verified for direct deposit services, or to elect to receive a paper check.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, just one more question on the Beacon portal, because this is another issue for my constituents. The app itself is not particularly great. You can't do all the functions on the app, the phone app, that you can do on the computer. And so we have a lot of constituents who don't have a computer. And so that's a place for hiccups right now. So when can we expect improvements to that Beacon app for mobile phones?
I may have to get back to you on that. Okay. I will tell you, we've received lots of very positive reviews on the mobile app. So I'm sorry to hear that maybe there are some functions that can't be handled. In terms of direct deposit and account verification, that will be part of, we will include in our communication to our customers and the instructions and information, every way that they can upload this information and verify these accounts. And if there is anything that cannot be done via the mobile app, I'm glad you brought that up, because we will make sure to include that in the messaging and give those customers instructions as to what they may be able to do in the alternative.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask if we can continue to get these numbers updates while we work on the budget. I would appreciate that on behalf of my constituents, to understand just how many cases labor continues to adjudicate and close.
Yep. Thank you. And I've been in touch with the comptroller's office based on what the secretary said. And they said they received a list yesterday, and today they mailed out 27,181 checks. And that's in the mail.
Wonderful.
So, the other thing is, are you providing email and contact information for inquiries about unemployment grants?
For these $1,000 checks, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, because I think you're asking people to go to the comptroller's office, but you're the ones that are.
That's correct. So there's a reason for that. We had a long conversation with the comptroller's office about this. We worked with them to make sure the frequently asked questions were accurate, and we certainly have a lot of information available and all these provisions of the Relief Act from our website. However, the Division of Unemployment is 100% federally funded. And we received very explicit instructions from the federal government that our federally funded UI staff cannot administer a state grant program. So while we run numbers every single week and we're able to pull these numbers and provide the list in the exact format that the comptroller asked for it from our vendor Sagitech, we have to be careful. Obviously, we answer calls and we're working with these customers every single day. But we are not able to set up a separate phone line or a separate contact specific to the Relief Act grant program for the checks, because it's separate from the eligibility determinations in UI. And we did make sure that the communication that went along with those checks for these customers is to help them understand that this is not a determination of eligibility. Some of these claimants who receive checks will inevitably be determined ineligible for the program. They do not have to pay back that $1,000. It was created by the legislature as a state grant program. So we're happy that the comptroller is partnering with us in this effort.
All right, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, it's good to see you. I know we had a long conversation about some issues, and I will echo my colleagues' comments. Your team in particular has been incredibly responsive and has spent a lot of time on the phone with my staff and the team from District 18, and I just wanted to know how much we appreciate that.
Thank you.
I had a quick comment and then a series of question. And I guess the one comment I wanted to make is around sort of the really high vacancy rate that the agency has been separate from the unemployment insurance, which obviously is unique. Thank you. Is unique to the current situation, but maybe I think the opportunity of bringing in so many new staff that are being trained, as one part of the Department of Labor, I would be maybe we could think creatively about how when we return to some level of normalcy, some of those folks who have been trained in the department could be shifted over to fill the gaps in other divisions that are just as critical. And then my question to you is really based on even your own comment earlier that we're creating a fully modernized system now with the transition. And I guess I know some of my colleagues are working on what I think is a really great piece of legislation that I know your department has been engaged in. But when you say fully modernized, there's a lot of gaps I think that many of us are still seeing, and I know that legislation hopefully will address it. And I guess some of those gaps in particular, the fact that our constituents are still having a difficult time of sort of figuring out who to call back. They may not even get something as basic as a caller ID that says this is the Department of Labor. I know that the health department has been really on top of making sure that when you get a call from a contact tracer, that it's not some random number that you think is spam, you know what it is. And I know we've heard from a lot of constituents that they didn't realize it was the Department of Labor calling, and something as simple as also making sure, that folks with disabilities, can fully access the online system. And again, that there is some way for somebody to get a phone call, to get a number where they can actually get a call back, or they can call back where it's not, sort of routed through, some crazy system where they have to start all over again. And so, I know a lot of those provisions are touched on in the legislation that's being worked on, but was hoping you could commit today, especially again, saying fully modernized, if I can get that from Verizon or Comcast when I call about my cable, I think we should be able to do the same thing, especially with the amount of money that we're spending. And so was hoping you could commit to working with our committee and with my colleagues on that piece of legislation to make sure that our constituents get that fully modernized system.
Yeah, absolutely. And you read my mind on a couple of those points. We absolutely intend to take advantage of so many of the vendor staffing that have been, recruited and trained and become an integral part of our department during this pandemic. Moving forward, we hope to keep on board as many of them as is feasible, to help us handle this ongoing problem. We do have to follow the federal legislation really closely. I mentioned in my remarks, and I wanted to just clarify for this committee, these subcommittees, that typically only state merit staff can adjudicate and make decisions on UI claims. That's part of the federal law for this program. So in the CARES Act, Congress had to give states the flexibility to use contracted vendor staffing to do this. They had to do that because no unemployment insurance in the country had the capacity to handle this volume. We're funded on workload by the federal government. And so the unemployment rate was the lowest it had been in decades. So states' capacity in unemployment insurance was also at historic low levels. It's impossible for a state agency to ramp up to the 800% increase in volume that we saw kind of overnight, which is why every state is utilizing these vendors, and the federal government had to give us the flexibility to be able to use them. That flexibility is likely going to go away at some point. So we will be trying to take advantage of the training that many of these vendor staffing have received already. In terms of the caller ID, I want to make sure that that we did actually implement that function. It has not rolled out as smoothly as we hoped because we have a caller ID that comes up as DOL adjudication for our Alorica vendor, a different caller ID that says USDOL UI or DOL UI for Accenture. There are 3 different labels that come out from whether it's the 2 vendors or our internal staff, but they both reference they all reference DOL UI. What I have discovered, because we still have people who say calls come up as unknown or they're not recognized on their phone, is DoIT and Verizon have informed us that not everyone's call provider accepts a caller ID if it's not programmed into their system, something about the way it's programmed. So we're working on messaging to make sure every customer has the numbers and the caller IDs associated with them. And if we can get our customers to program all of 3 of those numbers into their phone, then their provider will automatically connect to the caller ID. I know sometimes I get calls that show up as unknown. And that was the example I've given. So we're working to make sure all of our customers understand that as well, so that we can utilize the caller ID that we've worked so hard to create and make sure that it's coming up on the other end for our customers. But absolutely, we will continue to, when I talk about a modernized system, I mean a system. We're one of a handful of states in the nation that have a system that integrates its benefits and contributions, claimant and employer portals all in one system for unemployment insurance. We obviously have worked very closely with our state's Department of Disabilities in testing to make sure that the site is completely accessible. So we will continue to do that, and I'm absolutely happy to work with you on that legislation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madam Secretary, it's been kind of strange this last week that we've seen, I know my office and other offices have seen an uptick in unemployment insurance claims. Do you know is there anything in particular that's driving that?
We've seen an uptick in fraudulent claims. This past week, the claim volume was actually a little bit lower than the week before. So I'm happy about that. I don't know what might be driving other than, we saw our highest volume in the summer with the extra $600 being offered. And we see our highest volume again now since then with the extra $300 being offered on these claims. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Okay. I didn't know are there certain benefits that are ending on March 14th?
Yes. So December 27th, I would just think that most customers who have extended their claims have already come into our program. But yes, that absolutely could be the case. The Continued Assistance Act passed on December 27th, extended benefits for an additional 11 weeks and added $300 per week on top of regular benefits. So now we know that the federal government is working on a package to extend those benefits even further. But you're right, anyone who wants to file their claim and backdate or be eligible for the additional $300 and that additional 11 weeks must get into our system before mid-March.
And I have one final question, and then I'll open it up to the committee, and then we'll move on. So I think this recent supplemental budget included $15 million to pay for the interest that was accrued when it comes to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And it looked like DLS noted that they believed that the $15 million was more than the covered costs that were needed. Is that true? And also the other piece of it is that the money might not be needed in this fiscal year, but it would be more of the next fiscal year. So can you shed light on that?
Of course, Mr. Chair. The problem is we don't know exactly how much we need to borrow because one of the Relief Act amendments allows businesses with 50 employers or less to defer paying their taxes for the first 3 quarters. So the problem is we will be borrowing more than we would have otherwise without that amendment but we don't know exactly how much because we don't know how many of those employers will take advantage of the option to defer paying their taxes. If every single small business in the state defers paying their taxes for the entire first 3 quarters, we may need all of that $15 million in interest. And I think that was how they calculated the estimated value for that amount.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the secretary? Chairman Barnes, anything you want to add or any questions? Okay.
Nothing here. Do we have any witnesses for labor?
Yeah, well, I see there's a David McClone. Is he with you, Madam Secretary?
Yes, David McClone, okay. Our Deputy Secretary. But again, we have all of our division leaders on the call that were available for questions should you need them.
No problem. That was the
nothing further for me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I saw, and then there's Christopher, and then we have one witness, Christopher Dews.
Yes, my time can I go now or?
Yes, please. The floor is yours.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you again, Madam Secretary. Always a pleasure to hear you speak. My name is Christopher Dews, and I'm a policy advocate for the Job Opportunities Task Force, where our mission is to help lower wage workers advance to higher wage jobs. JOTF has been a leading voice on state workforce issues, and we strongly support the Department of Labor and its Division of Workforce Development, which funds critical job training, education, and unemployment services to some of Maryland's most vulnerable workers and job seekers. Like most states, just want to put this out here, Maryland is challenged in that a large percentage of its population has limited skills and education, leading to profitable employment. And there are just 3 avenues I want to quickly discuss for sustainability and growth regarding empowering our lower income workforce. And that is adult education, increased funding in EARN grant for the EARN grant, and expanding efforts for correctional education. Quickly, high school diplomas and adult education. 10.4% or 421,000 Maryland residents over the age of 25 do not have a high school diploma. Now, the Georgetown Center for Education and Workforce estimated that 70% of jobs in Maryland require some training beyond high school, making a high school diploma a necessary but not sufficient credential for most employment opportunities throughout the state and region. And so without access to skills training, these residents in Maryland's working families are likely to remain unemployed. Once again, that's 10% of Maryland's workforce. As such, Department of Labor's role is more critical than ever, as they already know, and we are thankful for their continued commitment to the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning and its programming. As an example, Maryland Department of Labor recently provided $16.8 million in combined state and federal funding to 25 publicly funded adult education providers, and JOTF supports the Senate President's current efforts to expand this funding to private nonprofits who provide similar adult education services. Secondly, I want to talk about the EARN grant. And beyond adult education, direct skills training and job placement are vital. JOTF was an original architect of the Employment Advancement Right Now Act, and its continued success is dependent upon the Department of Labor's continued support. EARN strives to close critical employment skills gaps by creating a coordinated system to advance the skills of the state's workforce through a collaboration of industry, state and local governments, and nonprofits. So currently, through EARN, 5,300 unemployed and underemployed individuals now have careers, and over 8,500 workers have received incumbent worker training and improving their skills to keep them competitive in the market. And this was increased even during the pandemic. So that's very impressive. I want to thank the department for that. For every $1 invested in EARN, an additional $17 in economic impact is created through employment access. So the necessity and demand for training is clear, especially during this pandemic, and the Department of Labor should maintain funding in this area, especially as we go into this new normal. The last thing I wanted to talk about was correctional education. Currently, the average reading level of the over 19,000 incarcerated citizens in Maryland's prison system remains between 5th and 8th grade. Less than half of that population has a high school diploma when they entered, and the majority of these people are indigent. They qualify as indigent. And so skills training and vocational training and education are vital for them to be able to secure employment upon release. And studies continue to show that recidivism rates drop for those who have a high school diploma or a college degree. So all we're saying is that we urge that you consistently put more and more funding into correctional education, into the EARN grant, and into adult education, as you've already helped 40,000 adults annually with current funding in these directions. And so for those reasons, we just ask that the committee, as well as the Maryland Department of Labor, continue to fund these efforts, and we thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dews. Is there any questions for Mr. Dews? I don't see any. Mr. Chairman, before I throw it over, so that concludes today's hearing on budget hearing on Department of Labor. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and your team. Mr. Chairman, I did want to note how appreciative our subcommittee is of the partnership that we've had in these extraordinary times. I believe this might be the last time our two subcommittees are together, in this capacity at least. So I just wanted to thank you and Vice Chair Solomon for just being great teammates.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were all a little, we didn't know how it was going to work this year, but it's worked great with you all. And I can say we're going to miss you next year when we're back on our own. So thanks for being a great partner this year to all the senators. And a closing remark, just to note, EED will be voting right after this at 3:08, 5 minutes after. But thank you again, Mr. Chairman.